The first time Marion Hartwell tried to tell someone what was happening at Meadowbrook Senior Living, her daughter smiled and changed the subject. The second time, the facility administrator sat in on the conversation, his presence a wall between Marion's broken speech and Jennifer's increasingly worried expression. By the third time, Marion had been moved to the memory care ward, the locked wing where residents aren't allowed phones and visitors need permission to enter. Her husband Ed would later say that the silence was worse than the neglect itself. The way their complaints evaporated into paperwork. The way concerned questions became evidence of confusion. The way asking for help transformed them, in official documents, from competent adults into problems requiring management. But at 2:17 a.m. on a November night, when no one was watching and no one was listening, someone was remembering. Luz Reyes pushed her janitorial cart past room 34 and heard weeping. She found Marion alone in the darkened common room, her husband soiled and abandoned because their call button had been broken for 3 days. Luz did what the day shift wouldn't. She helped. She cleaned Ed with dignity. She checked Marion's skin and found fresh bed sores forming. And then she pulled out the worn spiral notebook she'd carried for 5 years, the one filled with dates, times, and observations that nobody knew existed. And she wrote it all down. Have you ever felt invisible in a moment when you needed desperately to be seen? Stay with us to discover how a janitor's habit of bearing witness became the evidence that reopened a case everyone thought was closed, and how 3 people who should have remained strangers became the family that fought back when the system tried to erase them. This is the story of the night book. The wedding photograph had survived 53 years, 3 children, 2 houses, and now this. A single room at Meadowbrook Senior Living where their marriage would be measured in square feet rather than memories. Ed Hartwell placed the silver frame on the narrow dresser, adjusting it twice before his hand stilled. Behind him, Marion watched from her wheelchair, tears tracking silently down her face. Her left hand trembled in her lap. The stroke had stolen her words, but left her awareness cruelly intact. "We'll make it work," Ed said, not turning around. His voice carried the same false brightness he'd used when their son David moved to California, when Jennifer's marriage hit rough patches, when the doctor first said stroke. "It's just temporary. Until you're stronger." Marion's right hand, still functional, reached for his arm. She managed one word, thick and effortful. "Home." Ed finally looked at her, and something in his chest cracked. 76 years old, a retired math teacher who'd spent decades solving problems with logic and patience. And he couldn't solve this. Couldn't keep his wife safe at home. Couldn't convince their daughter there had to be another way. "I know, sweetheart." He knelt beside her wheelchair, joints protesting. "I know." The room smelled of industrial cleaner and something else. Something institutional that no amount of decorating could hide. Their entire lives, reduced to what fit in a 12 by 14 space. The rest had gone to storage, to Jennifer's garage, to charity bins that accepted items people no longer needed. That first night, Marion's bladder woke her at 11:30. She pressed the call button mounted on her bed rail, the way the nurse had demonstrated during their afternoon orientation. 5 minutes passed. 10. Marion pressed again, holding the button longer. Ed woke to her small sounds of distress, not quite words, but close. He understood immediately. "I'll get someone." He found the hallway empty, the nurse's station abandoned except for a medication cart and a half-eaten sandwich. He walked faster, checking the common room, the dining area. 20 minutes after Marion first pressed the button, he returned to help her himself. his teacher's patience worn to nothing. Afterward, he pulled out the small notepad he'd carried for 40 years, originally for tracking student progress, then household expenses, now this. He wrote, November 10, 11:30 p.m. Call button unanswered, 20+ minutes. Had to assist M myself. The next morning, Administrator Derek Paulson stopped by during breakfast rounds, all teeth and warm handshakes. Just checking in. How was your first night? Ed mentioned the call button. Derek's smile never wavered, but something behind his eyes went flat and calculating. We'll absolutely look into that, Mr. Hartwell. Night shifts can be challenging. We're a bit understaffed on weekends. But we're like family here at Meadowbrook. You'll see. Ed nodded, but he kept the notepad in his pocket. Years of teaching had taught him. Document everything. Some problems revealed themselves slowly, in patterns that required patient observation. That afternoon, Marion tried to tell Jennifer about the night. But the words wouldn't come. Just fragments, tears, her good hand gesturing helplessly. Jennifer, exhausted from her own teenagers and a demanding job, heard only confusion. Mom, it's okay. It's an adjustment. Give it time. After Jennifer left, Ed sat beside Marion's wheelchair and took her hand. I'm writing it down, he whispered. All of it. I promise. Marion squeezed his fingers. In the institutional quiet of their new room, surrounded by borrowed furniture and temporary arrangements, they both understood. This was just the beginning. Wednesday morning, Ed checked Marion's pill dispenser against her discharge papers from the hospital, a habit he'd developed after 53 years of marriage to a woman who'd once reorganized their entire spice cabinet alphabetically. The numbers didn't match. Marion. He kept his voice level, the way he used to when a student's test revealed a fundamental misunderstanding. Your blood pressure medication. This is 40 milligrams. Your prescription says 20. Marion's eyes widened. She reached for the pills with her good hand, trembling. Ed found Nurse Stevens at the medication cart. There's been a mistake. Stevens barely looked up from her charting. I don't make mistakes, Mr. Hartwell. I've been doing this for 15 years. Then check the discharge papers. Please. She did, eventually, with the exasperated patience of someone indulging a confused old man. Her expression flickered, just briefly, before she recovered. Oh, must have grabbed the wrong bottle from the cart. Easy fix. Ed wrote it down. November 13, 8:15 a.m. Wrong medication dosage. Nurse Stevens, corrected after I noticed. Thursday, Marion returned from her bath with a bruise blooming purple on her upper arm, roughly the size and shape of gripping fingers. The aide, young, rushed, smelling of cigarette smoke, had called Marion sweetie throughout, speaking loudly as if Marion's stroke had damaged her hearing instead of her speech. Friday afternoon, Ed found Dorothy Chen in the common room, sitting in soiled clothes, forgotten. The television played to an empty room. Dorothy, sharp-minded despite her 81 years and recent hip surgery, looked at him with such profound humiliation that Ed had to turn away. How long? He asked gently. Since lunch. Her voice was small. I pushed the button. Nobody came. That evening, Ed drafted a formal complaint. Years of writing progress reports had taught him precision. He listed 4 incidents with dates, times, and specific staff names. Saturday morning, he hand-delivered it to Derek Paulson's office. Derek read it slowly, his expression morphing from concern to something harder. Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your vigilance, but you have to understand, Transition is difficult, especially at your age. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. Your daughter mentioned you've been having some trouble adjusting. This isn't about adjustment. These are safety issues. Every incident you've listed has an explanation. The medication error, human mistake, immediately corrected. The bruise, Marion resisted during her bath. Our aide was preventing a fall. The weekend understaffing. It's a temporary situation. We're actively hiring. Ed felt something shift in the room, like a door closing that he hadn't realized was open. Sunday, Jennifer visited during lunch. Marion tried to explain, gesturing, her limited words tumbling out in frustration. Ed started to translate, but Derek appeared in the doorway, uninvited. Everything okay in here? Jennifer's relief was visible. Oh, Derek? Yes, Dad was just... They're having some concerns. Derek slid into the conversation with practiced ease, reframing each complaint as misunderstanding. By the time Jennifer left, she'd promised to talk to them about being patient. After she left, Ed pressed Marion's call button to test it. 32 minutes passed before anyone responded. That night, Ed added to his notes. November 17, call button response time increasing. Derek sat in on Jay's visit, uninvited. M couldn't explain concerns. System failing. Marion watched him write, tears streaming. Ed took her hand. I see it too, he whispered. We're not confused. We're being silenced. Luz Reyes pushed her janitorial cart past the nurse's station at 10:47 p.m., invisible as always. The wheels needed oil. They'd squeaked for 3 months now, but maintenance never got around to the night shift's requests. She'd worked Meadowbrook's overnight hours for 5 years, ever since Miguel's deportation made 3 jobs necessary. Sophia was 12 then, Carlos just 7. Now Sophia packed both their lunches and helped Carlos with homework, while Luz cleaned office buildings from 6 to 2, houses from 3 to 7, then Meadowbrook from 10 until dawn. The facility at night was a different place, quieter, truer somehow. People dropped their masks when they thought no one was watching. Luz pulled out her spiral notebook, worn at the edges, held together with rubber bands, and noted the time. 10:47 p.m., second floor clear, medcart unattended nurses station. She'd been keeping these notes since childhood. A habit her mother called tu manera de recordar, your way of remembering. After her father died in that facility in Guadalajara, the notebook became something else. A promise. Tuesday night, 11:30 p.m. Luz heard a voice calling weakly from room 19. Dorothy Chen sat on her bed's edge, call button on the floor just beyond her reach. Her face, when she looked up at Luz, held such profound relief that Luz's throat tightened. I can't. My hip. Dorothy gestured helplessly. Luz should have called a nurse. Protocol was clear. Janitors clean, nurses care. But the call button had been ringing for 15 minutes before falling silent. Luz knew because she'd heard it from the utility closet. She helped Dorothy to the bathroom, retrieved the button, smoothed the sheets. Dorothy gripped her hand. Thank you. Nobody came. After Dorothy was settled, Luz wrote, Nov 5, 11:30 p.m., room 19. Dorothy Chen, call button on floor. No staff response, 15+ minutes. Wednesday night, 1:14 a.m. Ed Hartwell stood in the hallway in his pajamas, looking lost and desperate. Luz recognized the particular shame in his posture. She'd seen it in her father's final months. Please, he whispered. My wife. The call button's been broken for 3 days. Luce followed him to room 34. Marion sat in her wheelchair, tears streaming, unable to articulate what had happened, but radiating humiliation. The room smelled of urine and institutional cleaner that couldn't quite mask it. "I'm so sorry," Ed kept saying. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Luce should have walked away, should have called the night supervisor, should have protected her job, her family, her precarious stability. Instead, she helped. She'd done this for her father, those final months. Cleaned him with gentle efficiency, maintaining his dignity when the facility staff treated him like a burden. She knew how to make this quick, how to check Marion's skin properly, how to speak softly while working. Fresh bed sores, stage 1, both hips. When Marion was clean and comfortable, Luce found Ed sitting on their bed, head in his hands. He looked up, and something passed between them. Recognition of a shared knowledge about what happens to vulnerable people when systems fail them. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for treating her like a person." Luce pulled out her notebook. Nov 6, 1:14 a.m., room 34, Marion Hartwell. Call button broken 3 days, bed sores forming, no staff response. Ed watched her write. "You document everything?" "Yes." Luce's English was careful, deliberate. Someone should remember. She didn't tell him about her father. Didn't explain that this notebook was her way of refusing to let people disappear into institutional silence. She just wrote it all down, dates, times, what she saw with her own eyes. Because someday, someone might need to know the truth. And Luce Reyes had promised herself she would always remember, for people who couldn't. Friday morning, 6:03 a.m. Ed waited by the staff entrance, watching employees stream out after the night shift. When he spotted Luce, her exhaustion was visible in every movement, shoulders curved, steps heavy. "Ms. Reyes," she startled, then stilled. In daylight, Ed saw her clearly, younger than he'd assumed, maybe early 40s, with Sophia's straight dark hair escaping from a ponytail and worry lines etched around her eyes. "I wanted to thank you. Properly. What you did for Marion," his voice caught. "You gave her dignity when everyone else had forgotten she deserved it." Luce nodded once, then glanced toward the bus stop. Ed recognized that calculation, the minutes between shifts that meant survival. "Go," he said gently. "I just needed you to know we see you too." That night, when Luce positioned her cart near room 34 during rounds, she found a note taped inside. "Thank you. We see you too. Ed and Marion." Something shifted. The Hartwells stayed alert during evening hours now. Ed with his teacher's observant eye, Marion reading people through the lens of 40 years helping library patrons. Saturday night, they noted Nurse Stevens reusing gloves between residents. Sunday, the medication cart left unattended for 12 minutes while Stevens took a phone call. Monday night, 2 a.m., Ed flagged Luce down in the hallway. He whispered what they'd witnessed. Luce added it to her log with precise timestamps, her detailed methodology transforming their observations into documented evidence. "Why do you write everything?" Ed asked, curious about her system. "My father." Luce's voice was quiet. "Alzheimer's. He died in a place like this, in Mexico. My mother said things were wrong, bruises, wrong medications, other things. But we had no proof. The facility said she was confused, grieving, imagining things." She touched her notebook. "I promised myself, I'll remember for people who can't." Ed pulled out his own notepad, smaller, less detailed. "I've been documenting too. But yours has authority, times, direct observations, Mine just looks like an old man complaining." Luce studied his notes. She understood immediately what he couldn't say. His documentation would be dismissed as confused or paranoid. Hers carried different weight, the unimpeachable witness who had no reason to lie because no one thought she mattered enough to notice. Tuesday night, Marion was waiting when Luce arrived. Her right hand shook as she reached for Luce's arm. Her speech effortful but determined. Why? Luce understood the question beneath the word. Because bearing witness is a form of love. And because somewhere, sometime, someone might need to know the truth. Marion's eyes filled. She squeezed Luce's hand with surprising strength. In that moment, they became something unexpected. A family forged not by blood, but by the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to let suffering be invisible. Ed with his teacher's systematic mind, Marion with her librarian's instinct to help the vulnerable, Luce with her promise to remember. They didn't know that Derek Paulson had noticed Luce's extended time near room 34 on security footage, didn't know the retaliation already forming in his mind. They only knew this. They would document everything. They would bear witness together. And somehow, that felt like resistance, like hope, like the beginning of something that couldn't be silenced. Wednesday morning, Derek Paulson's voice over the intercom was professionally pleasant. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, could you come to my office, please?" Ed helped Marion into her wheelchair, his stomach tight. In his notepad pocket were 17 days of observations. In Luce's notebook, somewhere in her worn purse during her daytime shift, were the same incidents, time-stamped and corroborated. Derek's office smelled of expensive coffee and leather furniture. He gestured to chairs positioned lower than his desk. A power play Ed recognized from years of dealing with difficult school administrators. "I want to discuss some concerns." Derek's smile was practiced, empathetic. "Several staff members have mentioned you're struggling with adjustment, forming inappropriate attachments to employees. It's quite common. Residents sometimes fixate on particular caregivers as a way of coping with change." "We're not fixated," Ed said carefully. "We're grateful when staff treat my wife with dignity." "Of course." Derek leaned forward, conspiratorial. "But Ed, may I call you Ed? Sometimes what seems like kindness is actually enabling dependency. We're trying to help Marion become more independent. When staff exceed their roles, it undermines that therapeutic goal." Marion made a small sound of protest. Derek's eyes flicked to her, then away, the universal dismissal of those who couldn't speak fluently. "I'm also concerned about the frequency of Jennifer's visits. Sometimes families need space to allow residents to settle. Perhaps every other week instead of weekly." Ed felt the trap closing. "You want to isolate us?" Derek's expression shifted. Just slightly, the mask slipping to reveal something harder beneath. "I want to help you, Mr. Hartwell. But if you continue to struggle, we may need to consider whether you need a higher level of care. Our memory care unit provides excellent support for residents experiencing confusion or adjustment difficulties." The threat was clear: complain and lose everything. That afternoon, maintenance moved them to the East Wing. "Quieter rooms," Derek explained. Though Ed noticed immediately, they were also isolated from the common areas, from Dorothy Chen and other alert residents who might corroborate their observations. Thursday night, Luce found their new location. She positioned her cart nearby, listening to the building's rhythms. When Ed emerged at 2 a.m., she was waiting. "We can't call our daughter," he whispered. Derek suggested reducing her visits. "If we push back, he'll move Marion to memory care." Luce understood institutional power. She pulled out her phone, an older model, carefully maintained, because she couldn't afford replacement. Call who you need. Friday night, they called Ryan. Ed heard the skepticism in his grandson's voice. "Grandpa, are you sure you're not just having a hard time adjusting? These facilities aren't perfect, but..." Marion grabbed the phone. Her speech was halting, effortful, but determined. "Ryan, listen, we need help." Something in her voice, the desperation, the clarity beneath the stroke-affected words, shifted the conversation. Ryan promised to call Jennifer to look into things. Saturday morning, Jennifer called. Not them. She called Derek, who explained gently that Ed seemed increasingly paranoid, that Marion was feeding into his delusions, that perhaps professional evaluation was warranted. Saturday night, when Marion read Ryan's selected entries from Ed's notepad over Luce's phone, her voice was stronger. Ryan listened in silence. Sunday afternoon, Luce photographed pages from her notebook. Careful angles, clear timestamps visible. She texted them to Ryan's number. His response came within an hour. 17 incidents, documented independently by his grandparents and a night shift janitor who had no reason to lie. Identical details, corroborating evidence. Ryan's next message: "Keep documenting everything. But Grandpa, be careful. If they realize you're building a case, they'll shut you down." Ed read the message to Marion and Luce in the quiet of 2 a.m. Marion squeezed his hand. Luce added another entry to her log. Novi 17, 2:43 a.m., room 47. East Wing, Hartwell's isolated from other residents. Derek threatened memory care placement if complaints continue. They were being silenced systematically. But they were also, finally, being heard by someone who might help. The question was whether help would come before Derek found another way to make them disappear. Monday morning brought new rules. A laminated notice appeared on the Hartwell's door. For resident safety, door must remain open during daylight hours. Ed read it 3 times, understanding the message beneath the bureaucratic language. They were being watched now. Every conversation, every action, observed. Wednesday, Jennifer's visit included an uninvited guest. Derek positioned himself in the corner, just making sure everyone's comfortable, while Marion tried desperately to communicate through gestures and her halting speech. Ed attempted coded language. "Remember when we talked about that problem with the garden?" Jennifer looked confused, worried about his coherence. After she left, Derek's smile was sympathetic. "Your father seems increasingly confused, Jennifer. It's quite common in elderly patients, sometimes paranoia, sometimes memory issues. We're monitoring closely." Thursday night, 3:17 a.m. Luce moved silently past room 41, Mrs. Kapoor's room. She'd cleaned this hallway for 5 years, knew every resident's routine. Mrs. Kapoor kept her late husband's photograph on the dresser, a small silver frame she touched each night before sleeping. Tonight, Aide Marcus emerged from the room, pocketing something that caught the hallway light. Luce's pen was already moving. Nov 21, 3:17 a.m. Aide Marcus exiting room 41, Mrs. Kapoor, pocketing small object, silver frame possibly? Friday night, she told Ed. His face went still with recognition. Mrs. Kapoor mentioned missing items last week. Derek told her she'd misplaced them due to confusion. But she's sharp. Former accountant, keeps track of everything. The pattern clicked into place. Thefts blamed on elderly memory. Complaints dismissed as confusion. A system that turned victims into perpetrators of their own victimization. They developed a more sophisticated method. Ed's notepad entries became abbreviated codes. NSRG 8 p.m. meant Nurse Stevens reusing gloves at 8 p.m. Marion, whose hand function was slowly returning, marked suspicious staff with a star system on paper hidden inside her Bible. 1 star for minor infractions, 3 for serious concerns. At night, they translated everything into plain language for Luce, who recorded it with her meticulous timestamps. By Friday, Luce's November entries spanned 14 pages. 6 residents cross-referenced, 8 staff members, patterns of neglect that would be invisible in isolation, but together painted a damning picture. Friday afternoon, Luce arrived home at 2:30 p.m., exhausted from her morning house cleaning job. Sophia was waiting, 14 years old, but carrying the weight of someone much older. "Mama, you look tired. More than usual." Luce forced a smile. "Just busy, mija. Work is always busy." Sophia studied her mother with eyes too perceptive to fool. "Is something wrong at the nursing home?" "No, baby. Everything's fine." The lie tasted bitter. Luce had taught her children that honesty mattered, that integrity meant standing up for what's right. But how could she explain that she was risking everything? Their stability, their safety, their family, for 2 elderly people Sophia had never met. That night, Sophia made dinner while Luce slept fitfully on the couch. When Luce woke at 9 p.m. to prepare for her shift, she found a note on the kitchen counter in Sophia's careful handwriting. "I love you, Mama. Whatever you're doing, I trust you. S." Luce pressed the note to her chest, tears threatening. Sophia deserved better than this constant anxiety, this precarious existence. Carlos deserved a mother who wasn't bone-tired and frightened. They both deserved the childhood Miguel's deportation had stolen. But somewhere in Meadowbrook's East Wing, Marion and Ed were fighting to maintain their dignity against a system designed to erase them. And Luce had promised herself, her father's memory, everyone who'd ever been silenced, that she would remember. She tucked Sophia's note into her notebook, next to her father's name in her earliest entries, and went to work. Saturday evening, 8 o'clock p.m. Ed noted the time automatically when Dorothy Chen's voice carried down the East Wing hallway. "Help! I need help!" Marion's eyes met his. Ed stepped into the corridor, empty. He returned to their room, listening. At 8:14 p.m., Dorothy called again, voice weaker. At 8:23 p.m., Ed went looking for staff. The nurses' station sat abandoned, the medication cart pushed to the side. By 8:35 p.m., Dorothy's calls had become intermittent, desperate. Ed tried their call button, red light glowing uselessly, no response. Marion gripped his hand, her face stricken. At 8:47 p.m., they heard the crash, then screaming that turned Ed's blood cold. Staff materialized from nowhere, rushing past their open door. Radios crackled. Someone called 911. In the sudden chaos, no one noticed Ed writing in his notepad. 9:23, 8, 8. 47 p.m. Dorothy Chen calling for help, 47 minutes, no staff response until fall. Sunday morning brought the official story. Dorothy had wandered despite instructions to use her call button, fell, fractured her hip. The incident report, glimpsed when a staff member left it momentarily on the nurses' station, described resident non-compliance with mobility restrictions. Luce arrived for her Sunday night shift to find Dorothy's room empty, stripped of personal items. She pulled out her notebook, flipping backward through Saturday's entries. Her hands stilled. 9:23, 8:02 p.m., second floor utility room, heard call button from room 19, Dorothy Chen. No staff response observed. 8:23 p.m., Walked past room 19, heard Dorothy Chen calling for help, no staff present in hallway. 8:35 p.m., second pass. Room 19, Dorothy Chen still calling, voice weaker, no staff response. 8:44 p.m., third pass, still calling. 8:46 p.m., in stairwell, heard crash and screaming from direction of room 19. 44 minutes, documented, minute by minute. Dorothy's voice growing weaker as time passed and no one came. Monday afternoon, Luce was emptying trash bins on the first floor when she heard raised voices near the administrator's office. A man's voice, anguished and angry. "My mother called for help for 45 minutes before she fell. How is that possible? Where was your staff?" Derek's response was smooth, practiced. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're upset. But your mother's cognitive state has been declining. She sometimes becomes confused about, 'My mother is sharp as a tack. She's an accountant. She knows exactly what happened.'" Luce froze, her hand on the trash bin. The man, Dorothy's son, emerged from Derek's office, face flushed with fury and helplessness. In the hallway, Ed Hartwell stood waiting, having positioned himself there deliberately. As Michael Chen passed, Ed spoke quietly. "Talk to the night janitor. She heard everything." Michael stopped. "What?" "Luce Reyes, night shift. She was here. She documented it." Tuesday afternoon, Michael found Luce as her shift ended. She was terrified. Of deportation, of losing her job, of becoming visible when invisibility had kept her safe for so long. But she thought of her father, of her mother's helpless fury when no one would believe what had happened in that facility in Guadalajara, of Marion's tears and Ed's desperate dignity, of Dorothy Chen, sharp and proud, lying in a hospital with a fractured hip because 44 minutes was too long to wait for help. Luce pulled out her notebook. "Saturday night," she said quietly. "I heard her calling. I wrote down the times." Michael Chen photographed the pages, his hands shaking. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing her." After he left, Luce stood in the parking lot, watching the sunrise. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Derek's office. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Whatever came next, there was no going back. The lawyer's letter arrived Wednesday morning, corporate letterhead announcing Michael Chen's demand for records related to his mother's fall. Derek Paulson read it twice, his coffee cooling on the desk, before pulling up security footage. He watched Luce Reyes push her cart past the second floor at 2:17 a.m. on November 6th. Watched her pause outside room 34 for 11 minutes, far longer than cleaning required. Watched her lean close to Ed Hartwell 3 nights later, their heads bent together in conversation. Thursday morning, Derek waited until Luce's shift ended at 6. She appeared in his doorway at 6:14, still in her cleaning uniform, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "Ms. Reyes, sit down." She remained standing, gripping her purse. Inside it, the notebook pressed against her hip like a stone. "I've received some concerning information." Derek's voice carried practiced sympathy. "About your interactions with certain residents, specifically the Hartwells and Dorothy Chen." Luce said nothing. Her mother taught her, silence cannot be twisted into evidence. "Your job is to clean." Derek leaned forward, all false concern. "Not to involve yourself in resident care, not to have extended conversations, certainly not to interfere with family dynamics or medical decisions." "I help when people need help," Luce said quietly. "That's not your role." His tone hardened. "And frankly, it's inappropriate. Residents sometimes become confused about boundaries, form dependencies on staff members. It's manipulative, even if unintentional." The accusation stung because Luce had worried about exactly this, whether her kindness somehow made things worse. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to basement and first floor areas only. No access to second floor, no contact with the residents you've been, he paused delicately, befriending. Luce thought of Marion's tears, Ed's desperate gratitude, Dorothy's relief when someone finally came. She thought of her father, alone in his final months, and her mother's voice. No one believed me. Do you understand? Yes. The word tasted like ash. That night, Luce pushed her cart through the basement's fluorescent silence, emptying trash bins and mopping floors no residents ever saw. At 3 a.m., she stood in the service elevator, finger hovering over the second floor button. One press, just to check on them. The elevator doors opened on the first floor instead. She'd made her choice. Friday afternoon, Ed convinced Mr. Gutierrez to let them use his cell phone. The older man, mostly deaf, happy for the company, unconcerned about borrowed technology. Ed dialed Ryan's number with shaking hands. They've isolated Luce, he told his grandson. She can't reach us anymore. Ryan's pause spoke volumes. We need another way to document. That evening, Ed wrote a careful note describing Nurse Stevens' medication errors that afternoon. Specific times, resident names, the pills he'd observed through their open door. At 9 p.m., he folded it small and dropped it in the second-floor trash can near the utility closet, the one he'd watched Luce empty every night during her rounds. Saturday night, Luce found it while collecting consolidated trash. Her hands trembled as she read Ed's precise handwriting. She could lose everything: her job, her children's stability, possibly her freedom if Derek pursued charges. But she was already complicit. Had been since the first entry 5 years ago, when she'd promised herself she would remember. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. Sunday night at 11:47 p.m., Luce retrieved Ed's latest note from the designated trash can. His abbreviated code had become more sophisticated. NSWM 615P-RM22 meant Nurse Stevens, wrong medication, 6:15 p.m., room 22. Luce translated it into her log with timestamps and context, added her own overnight observations, and left a brief response folded in the bottom of the same bin. The system worked through careful timing. Ed dropped notes during evening rounds when staff, attention scattered across dinner service and medication distribution. Luce, during her 3 a.m. break when the night supervisor disappeared to his car for his habitual nap, took the service elevator to second floor, retrieved the notes, left her responses, and returned before anyone noticed. Monday and Tuesday passed without incident. Wednesday night, no note waited. Luce checked twice, anxiety tightening her chest. At 3:30 a.m., she risked positioning her cart near the second-floor stairwell, listening to the building's rhythms. Room 34 remained dark and silent. Thursday morning, she found Marion's note, the handwriting shaky but determined. Ed's sick, vomiting. They say stomach flu. Wrong pills yesterday? M. Luce immediately checked her Tuesday night entries. Ed had received evening medications at 6:15 p.m. from Nurse Stevens. But Luce had noted at 10:30 p.m. that Stevens left the medication card open in the hallway while taking a lengthy personal call, and Aide Marcus had been nearby, the same Marcus she'd documented pocketing Mrs. Kapoor's silver frame. She wrote a careful response. Tell them about stomach symptoms. Ask for blood test. Be specific about timing. She left it Thursday night, praying they'd find it. Friday morning, Ed was worse. Severe vomiting, confusion, rapid heartbeat. Symptoms Marion recognized from the pharmacy warnings on his blood pressure medication. She pressed their call button urgently until someone finally came. Derek arrived at the room at 10:30 a.m., all professional concern. "Mr. Hartwell, we're going to send you to the hospital, just to be safe." "What did you give him?" Marion's speech emerged thick but forceful. "His regular medications, Mrs. Hartwell. But sometimes elderly patients have sudden declines. We'll have him evaluated." Derek's tone suggested her question itself was evidence of confusion. The ambulance arrived at 11. Marion tried to follow, but Derek's hand on her wheelchair was gentle and immovable. "You should rest. Jennifer's on her way." After Ed left, Marion returned to their room and found Luce's note in the trash can, where she'd learned to check each morning. Tell them about stomach symptoms. But Ed was already gone, and Marion was alone with her inadequate words and Derek's watchful presence. Jennifer arrived at 2 p.m. to find her mother incoherent with stress. Her stroke-affected speech regressed to fragments. Derek appeared in the doorway, voice heavy with reluctant suggestion. "Jennifer, I hate to bring this up, but your mother might need closer monitoring. Just while Ed's hospitalized. Our memory care unit could provide more intensive support during this difficult time." Marion understood every word. She tried to protest, but her tongue wouldn't cooperate, and her tears only confirmed Derek's assessment. Jennifer signed the papers at 3:15 p.m. Friday morning arrived with bureaucratic efficiency. 2 staff members appeared at room 34 at 9 a.m., one pushing a wheelchair, the other carrying a clipboard thick with forms. "Mrs. Hartwell, we're moving you somewhere more comfortable," the younger one said, her voice pitched high and slow, as if Marion were a child. Marion's eyes found Jennifer, standing uncertainly in the doorway. She tried to form words, but panic seized her throat, reducing speech to desperate fragments. "No, Ed, please. Mom, it's just temporary." Jennifer crouched beside the wheelchair, guilt etched into every line of her face. "Just until Dad's better. They'll take good care of you." Derek materialized behind Jennifer, solid and reassuring. "The memory care unit has more staff, Mrs. Hartwell. More attention. You'll be safer there while we're all worried about Ed." Marion understood every word. Understood that memory care meant locked doors and supervised visits. Understood that this was punishment disguised as protection. She reached for Jennifer's hand, squeezed with all her strength, tried to communicate everything her failing speech couldn't express. Jennifer pulled away gently. "I have to get to work, Mom. I'll visit Sunday, I promise." The memory care ward occupied the facility's north wing, separated from the main building by 2 locked doors and a different philosophy. Here, residents were patients, agency was danger, autonomy required supervision. Marion's new room held a bed, a dresser, and a bathroom with the door removed. No locks, no privacy. The window overlooked the parking lot, barred on the outside for safety. Her wedding photograph sat on the dresser. Someone had thought to bring it. And the silver frame mocked her with its reflection of everything she'd lost. Saturday morning, Ed woke in the hospital to a doctor explaining blood tests. "Your medication levels were dangerously high, Mr. Hartwell. 4 times your prescribed dose. Do you remember taking extra pills?" "I take what the nurses give me." Ed's voice was hoarse from vomiting. "Nothing else." The doctor's expression suggested skepticism, masked as concern. Medication mismanagement is common in elderly patients. Memory issues, confusion about what's been taken. I'm not confused. But even Ed heard the desperation in his voice. The way defending his competence sounded like proof of its absence. Sunday morning, Jennifer arrived at the hospital with coffee and forced optimism. "Dad, they're discharging you today. I've arranged for you to go back to Meadowbrook." Where's Marion? Jennifer's pause lasted too long. She's safe. She's somewhere she can be monitored closely. Where? Ed struggled upright, ignoring the IV pull. Jennifer, where is your mother? The memory care unit. Just temporarily, while you were sick. Derek thought he could silence us. Ed's voice broke. That's what this is. We complained, so he's erasing us, making sure no one listens. Dad, you're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense, and that's what terrifies you. Ed grabbed her hand. Jennifer, please. She's trapped. They've locked her up for being inconvenient. Hospital staff appeared at the commotion. Someone suggested sedation for Ed's aggressive behavior. Jennifer called Derek, voice shaking, and his soothing responses only confirmed Ed's worst fears. Sunday night, Luce pushed her cart through the second floor's empty silence. Room 34's door stood open, the space already stripped of personal items, institutional and anonymous. She checked the designated trash can. Marion's note lay crumpled at the bottom, her handwriting barely legible. Memory ward, help us. Luce stood in the hallway at 2 a.m., notebook pressed against her chest. They'd lost. The system had swallowed Marion whole, labeled Ed unreliable, and reduced their resistance to symptoms requiring management. Monday morning, Luce walked into FedEx with her spiral notebook and made 147 photocopies. Her hands shook as she fed pages through the machine, 5 years of witness transformed into evidence. She called Ryan's office from the parking lot. This is Luce Reyes, she told his voicemail, her voice steadier than she felt. I have evidence. Tuesday morning, Ryan Hartwell drove 4 hours south from Chicago, his briefcase holding only a legal pad and growing uncertainty about what he'd find. He'd built his career on corporate contracts and merger negotiations, clean, rational disputes resolved through precedent and logic. This felt different, messier, personal. Luce waited at a corner booth in the diner, coffee untouched, her hands wrapped around the cup for warmth she couldn't quite feel. She recognized Ryan immediately. Ed had his grandson's photograph on their dresser, though this man looked harder than the smiling law school graduate in the silver frame. Miss Reyes. Ryan slid into the booth opposite her, professional and cautious. Thank you for meeting me. She pushed the stack of photocopied pages across the laminate table. 5 years, she said quietly. Everything I saw. Ryan opened the first page, scanning Luce's precise handwriting, the dated entries, the clinical detail. He turned to the second page, the third. His coffee arrived and cooled while he read, his attorney's mind already cross-referencing incidents, recognizing patterns that would have remained invisible in isolation. Nov 5, 2024, 11:30 p.m. Room 19, Dorothy Chen, call button on floor, no staff response, 15+ minutes. Nov 14, 2024, 2:17 a.m. Room 34, Marion Hartwell, bed sores forming both hips, call button broken 3 days. Deck 4, 2024, 10:30 p.m. Medication cart unattended hallway. Nurse Stevens on personal call, 12+ min. Aide Marcus nearby. 1,800 entries, Luce said when Ryan finally looked up. Dozens of residents. All the dates match what your grandparents wrote. Ryan spent Tuesday night in a cheap motel, reading until his eyes burned. Wednesday, he visited Ed at the hospital during discharge paperwork, then drove to Meadowbrook, where Derek grudgingly allowed 20 minutes with Marion in the memory care ward's common room, a staff member positioned within earshot. Marion's eyes, when she saw Ryan, held such desperate hope that he had to look away. She gripped his hand with surprising strength, her speech halting but determined. He's lying. All of it. Lies. I know, Grandma, Ryan whispered. I'm going to fix this. Thursday afternoon, Ryan sat across from his Aunt Jennifer in her living room, spreading documentation between them like evidence of her complicity. Ed's notepad entries, Luce's log, hospital toxicology reports showing medication levels that couldn't be accidental. Jennifer stared at the papers, her capable marketing manager's composure crumbling. I thought he was helping them adjust, Derek said. Her voice broke. Oh, God, what have I done? You trusted the wrong person, Ryan said, not unkindly. Now you need to authorize me to act as their attorney, both of them. Jennifer signed the papers with shaking hands. Friday morning, Ryan filed an emergency petition in county court. Immediate release of Marion Hartwell from unlawful confinement. Temporary restraining order preventing Edward Hartwell's placement in memory care. Emergency investigation into Meadowbrook Senior Living's practices. The exhibits attached: 12 key entries from Luce's log, Ed's corroborating notes, medical records Ryan had subpoenaed, painted a damning picture of systemic abuse. Saturday morning brought the hearing notice. Monday, December 16th, 9 a.m. Saturday afternoon, Derek Paulson received legal service. By evening, he'd retained Walsh and Associates, reviewed security footage with cold calculation, and identified the leak. His call to Luce came at 6:47 p.m. Ms. Reyes, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Violation of resident privacy, HIPAA breaches, exceeding job authority. You'll receive final payment by mail. Luce stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, watching Sophia and Carlos do homework at the table. Everything she'd feared, crystallizing into reality. She called Ryan with numb fingers. He fired me. I know. Ryan's voice carried grim determination. Luce, I need you to testify Monday. I know what this costs you, but without your witness, they'll dismiss everything as confused elderly people imagining patterns. You're the one person Derek can't discredit. Luce looked at her children, thought of her father, remembered Marion's tears. Monday, she agreed. I'll be there. Sunday evening, Luce sat at the kitchen table with Sophia and Carlos, her children's faces reflecting the fears she'd tried so hard to hide. I lost my job, she told them, and Monday, I have to testify in court about what I saw at Meadowbrook. Carlos, 9 years old and still young enough for simple questions, asked, Are you scared? Yes, Luce admitted. Very scared. Sophia reached across the table, her 14-year-old hand finding her mother's. Abuela would be proud, Mama. You're doing what she couldn't do for Abuelo. That night, Luce reread her earliest entries, her father's name appearing in shaky script from 5 years ago, when grief was fresh and documentation felt like the only control she had over chaos. She fell asleep with the notebook pressed against her chest. Monday morning arrived with courthouse formality. Ryan represented the Hartwells. Meadowbrook had retained Walsh and Associates, a firm known for defending healthcare facilities against negligence claims. Ed sat in the gallery beside Jennifer, discharged from the hospital but still pale. Marion appeared via video feed from the memory care ward, Derek having refused transportation, a staff member visible in the frame behind her. Judge Carol Martinez, 62, took the bench with the efficient authority of 2 decades in elder law. She reviewed Ryan's emergency petition, then nodded to Walsh. Your Honor, Walsh began, his tone reasonable and sympathetic. This is fundamentally a family dispute. The Hartwells have struggled with adjustment to assisted living, common in elderly patients. Mrs. Hartwell requires a memory care for valid medical reasons. We have a psychiatric evaluation completed Friday. He presented documents. Marion labeled disoriented, cognitively impaired, unable to make reasoned decisions. Ed described with paranoid ideation consistent with early-stage dementia. By 11 a.m., Walsh had built his case through carefully curated evidence. Glowing incident reports, medical notes cherry-picked to suggest confusion, staff testimonials praising Meadowbrook's care. Judge Martinez listened, her expression neutral. "Mr. Hartwell, I need countervailing evidence. Your petition makes serious allegations." "I have it, Your Honor." Ryan called his first witness, Edward Hartwell. Ed took the stand, 76 years old but steady, his notepad in hand. He testified about the systematic retaliation, the escalating neglect, the patterns he'd documented with a teacher's methodical precision. Walsh's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Hartwell, you were hospitalized for medication overdose last week. Isn't it possible you took extra pills and simply don't remember? That the stress of adjustment has affected your memory?" Ed's hand trembled on his notepad. "I took only what nurses gave me." "But you can't be certain, can you? At your age, with everything you've been through." "I know what happened," Ed said quietly. "I documented everything. Every incident, every time, every detail." Walsh smiled sympathetically. "Of course you did, Mr. Hartwell. The question is whether what you documented reflects reality or reflects the confusion of a frightened, elderly man who's struggling with changes beyond his control." The morning recess came with Walsh's words hanging in the air, undermining Ed's credibility with compassion more effective than hostility. In the hallway, Jennifer held her father while he tried not to weep. Ryan checked his watch. 1 p.m. would bring Marion's video testimony. Then Michael Chen. Then finally Luz. Everything depended on whether Judge Martinez would believe an invisible janitor over credentialed professionals. Whether bearing witness carried weight in a system designed to discount it. Ryan looked at Luz, waiting on a bench near the courtroom doors, her borrowed dress and terrified dignity. "Ready?" he asked gently. Luz thought of her father, of Marion and Ed, of every promise she'd made to remember for people who couldn't. "Ready?" she said. The afternoon session began at 1 p.m. with Marion's video testimony. She appeared on the courtroom monitor, seated in the memory care ward's sterile common room, a staff member visible in the corner of the frame like a guard. Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Hartwell, can you hear me clearly?" Marion nodded, her right hand gripping the armrest. Her speech emerged slowly, each word requiring visible effort, but her eyes held fierce clarity. "Tell us what happened at Meadowbrook," Ryan prompted gently. "They made us invisible." Marion paused, gathering strength. "Call buttons. Broken. Nobody came. Ed helped me himself. 3 days. Nobody fixed it." She described the medication errors, the rough handling during baths, the bruises she couldn't explain. Her halting speech made each word land with unexpected weight. This wasn't confusion, but determination forcing itself through damaged neural pathways. Walsh rose for cross-examination, his voice carrying practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Hartwell, you suffered a major stroke. Isn't it possible you're confused about some details? That your memory—" "I know. What happened to us?" Marion's tears came, but she held his gaze through the camera. "My words are broken, not my mind." The courtroom fell silent. Jennifer wiped her eyes in the gallery. At 2 p.m., Ryan called Michael Chen. He testified about Dorothy's fall, the 47 minutes of unanswered calls, the discrepancies between Meadowbrook's incident report and his mother's account. Walsh objected repeatedly. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen's case is irrelevant to Mrs. Hartwell's placement. Judge Martinez allowed limited testimony, but the pattern was emerging. Complaints dismissed, documentation contradicted by lived experience. Families told their loved ones were unreliable witnesses. At 3 p.m., Ryan called his final witness, Luz Reyes. The courtroom stilled. Luz stood, smoothing the borrowed dress Sophia's neighbor had lent her. She walked to the stand on legs that felt disconnected from her body, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Ryan's voice was gentle. Ms. Reyes, how long did you work at Meadowbrook? 5 years, night shift, janitorial. And during that time, did you keep any personal records? Luz pulled out her spiral notebook, its pages soft with handling, rubber bands holding it together. Yes, I write things down, always have. Walsh objected immediately. Your Honor, this witness has no medical expertise, no relevant qualifications. She's a disgruntled former employee facing privacy violation accusations. I'll allow it. Judge Martinez interrupted. Continue, Ms. Reyes. Ryan had organized photocopies chronologically, marking key entries with yellow tabs. At 3:30 p.m., Luz began reading. November 5th, 11:30 p.m., room 19, Dorothy Chen calling for help. Call button on floor, out of reach. No staff response, 15 minutes minimum. She turned pages, her voice growing steadier. November 14th, 2:17 a.m., room 34. Marion Hartwell, bed sores forming both hips. Call button broken 3 days, Ed Hartwell helping her himself. December 4th, 10:30 p.m. Medication cart unattended, hallway near nurse's station. Nurse Stevens on personal call, 12 minutes. Aide Marcus nearby. Entry after entry. 17 incidents spanning 5 years, involving 15 residents. Each corroborated by medical records Ryan had subpoenaed. Each showing patterns of neglect, followed by documentation that erased the truth. At 5:15 p.m., Walsh stood for cross-examination, and Luz braced herself for the attack she knew was coming. Walsh circled the witness stand like a prosecutor who'd found his angle. Ms. Reyes, you kept these notes secretly, correct? Never informed anyone? Yes. You photographed residents' private information? Documented their personal medical situations without consent? Luz's hands trembled on the notebook. I didn't photograph anyone. I wrote what I saw, times, and what happened. But you recorded private medical information, bed sores, medication issues, personal care needs. That's a HIPAA violation, isn't it? Ryan objected. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Judge Martinez looked at Walsh. Ask questions, counsel. Walsh pivoted. You were terminated from Meadowbrook for exceeding your authority and violating resident privacy. Isn't this testimony just revenge? Luz met his eyes, thinking of her father, of Marion's tears, of Ed's desperate gratitude when someone finally saw them. I lost my job because I told the truth. Her voice steadied. My father died in a facility like this, in Mexico. He had Alzheimer's. My mother said things were wrong, bruises, wrong medications, other things. But we had no proof. The facility said she was confused, grieving, imagining things. She touched the notebook. I promised myself I would remember for people who can't. That's all I did. I remembered. The courtroom was utterly silent. Walsh pressed harder. You're undocumented, aren't you? Your husband was deported. Objection. Ryan was on his feet. Relevance? Sustained. Move on, Mr. Walsh. But damage was intended, not done. Walsh switched tactics. These entries, How do we know they're accurate? You could have written anything, anytime. There's no verification. Actually, Ryan interrupted, we verified 17 entries against subpoenaed medical records, incident reports, and call system data. Would you like to review the exhibits? He distributed packets to Walsh and the judge. 17 incidents where official Meadowbrook records contradicted Luce's contemporaneous documentation. In all 17 cases, Luce's version matched medical outcomes. Bed sores where incident reports claimed none. Medication errors where charts showed correct dosages. Call button failures where logs indicated responses within minutes. Judge Martinez studied the comparison closely. Mr. Walsh, your client's records show Marion Hartwell had no bed sores on November 14th. Yet her hospital admission on December 6th documented stage 2 ulcers consistent with several weeks' development. Walsh had no answer. At 5:45 p.m., Judge Martinez recessed until Tuesday morning. Ed sat in Jennifer's living room that night, staring at their wedding photograph. Marion lay in the memory care ward, counting ceiling tiles. Luce held Sophia close on their worn couch, unable to sleep. Ryan worked until 3 a.m., building his closing argument around a simple truth. The most reliable witness was the one nobody expected. The invisible woman who simply wrote down what she saw. Tuesday morning, Judge Martinez returned with her ruling. I'm ordering Mrs. Marion Hartwell's immediate release from memory care. I find no credible medical basis for her confinement. Her voice carried quiet fury. I'm also ordering an emergency state investigation into Meadowbrook Senior Living based on credible evidence of systemic neglect, falsification of records, and retaliation against complainants. Marion was released that afternoon. Ed held her in the courthouse hallway while she wept. And Luce stood nearby, witnessing their reunion the way she'd witnessed everything else, with careful attention and a promise to remember. Tuesday morning, Judge Martinez returned with a ruling that took less than 5 minutes to deliver, but would reshape everything that followed. I'm ordering Mrs. Marion Hartwell's immediate release from memory care. I find no credible medical basis for her confinement. Her voice carried quiet fury. I'm also ordering an emergency state investigation into Meadowbrook Senior Living, based on credible evidence of systemic neglect, falsification of records, and retaliation against complainants. Marion was released that afternoon. Ed held her in the courthouse hallway while she wept. Not from sadness now, but relief so profound, it had nowhere else to go. Luce stood nearby, witnessing their reunion the way she'd witnessed everything else. And Jennifer wrapped her arms around both her parents, whispering apologies they'd already forgiven. But victory carried complications. Derek's attorney filed a criminal HIPAA complaint against Luce within hours. Over the next week, state inspectors descended on Meadowbrook like a reckoning. Staff members, sensing the changing winds, began talking. Medication logs were audited, security footage reviewed. By Christmas, 3 nurses and 2 aides were suspended. Derek resigned January 5th, his carefully constructed reputation crumbling into LinkedIn updates about pursuing new opportunities. The state moved to revoke Meadowbrook's license entirely. Ed and Marion returned home with in-home care services Jennifer had arranged, finally prioritizing correctly. But they couldn't forget Luce, who faced legal charges and couldn't find work. No facility would hire someone accused of HIPAA violations, regardless of circumstances. Mid-January, Ryan called Luce to his office. She arrived terrified, expecting more legal trouble. Instead, he offered her a position: patient advocate consultant, helping families document concerns about care facilities and training them on proper observation protocols. The salary covered her bills. The firm would take her immigration case pro bono. Luce stared at him, unable to speak. Sophia, who'd accompanied her mother, squeezed her hand. "You showed us what bearing witness actually means," Ryan said quietly. "We want to learn from you." February 1st brought Marion's greatest triumph yet. Her speech therapy had progressed enough that she could testify clearly before the state legislature's Committee on Assisted Living Oversight Reform. Ed, Marion, and Luce sat together at the witness table. Marion spoke slowly, but each word landed with weight. "For months, no one heard us. We were invisible, inconvenient, confused." She turned to Luce. "She saw us when we were invisible. She remembered when everyone else forgot." The committee was moved. February 23rd, the state passed new legislation, mandatory third-party oversight for facilities with multiple unresolved complaints, protected whistleblower status for facility employees who report neglect, quarterly independent audits. The sponsor named it the Notebook Act, after Luce's spiral notebook, now entered into the legislative record as Exhibit A, proof that bearing witness matters, that invisible people see truth, that documentation can become justice. Sunday afternoon in late February, Luce brought Sophia and Carlos to Ed and Marion's home for dinner. Marion had cooked chicken enchiladas from a recipe Luce had shared with Ed's patient assistance. They weren't related by blood or law, but they were family, bound by the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to let suffering be invisible. After dinner, Luce gave Marion a gift wrapped in newspaper comics. Marion unwrapped it carefully, a new spiral notebook, its pages blank and waiting. "What should I write?" Marion asked, her speech still halting but clear. Luce smiled. "Whatever you see. Someone might need to remember." Marion opened to the first page and wrote the date. Then she wrote, "Today, we had dinner with family." Ed read over her shoulder, and his hand found hers. Carlos and Sophia were laughing in the kitchen. Ryan was explaining legal procedure to an interested Sophia. Jennifer was helping with dishes, finally present in the way that mattered. And Luce sat quietly, watching them all, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remember for people who can't, and teach them to remember for themselves.